Welcome to the Deep Dive History series where we discuss team achievements, major players, and their current futures. Today we'll be covering the Atlanta Hawks. Before we get into it, please hit that like and subscribe button for more of these type of videos. Let's get right into the Atlanta Hawks history. The year is 1953 and the Milwaukee Hawks just came off a horrible season going 27-43, landing them the second overall pick in the 1954 draft. There was a special talent out of LSU who won all SEC honors 3 times and consensus All-American 2 times, Bob Pettit. Bob wasn't the strongest kid, sitting roughly at 205 pounds, but he stood at a lengthy 6 feet 9 inches tall. This was enough for the Milwaukee Hawks to select him with the second overall pick in the 1954 draft. The Hawks' record in 1953-1954 season actually worsened to a measly 21-51 record. However, that was not Ball's fault at all. In his rookie season, he averaged 20.4 points, 13.8 rebounds, and 3.2 assists, landing him the Rookie of the Year award, All-NBA honors, and his first All-Star appearance. Ball went on a tear in his next 3 years in the NBA where he averaged 25 points, 16.8 rebounds, 2.2 assists, landing him 3 All-NBA honors, 2 scoring titles, and an MVP trophy in 1956. In 1958, Bob led the Atlanta Hawks to their second NBA Finals appearance in 2 years. However, this time, he was going to do whatever it took to take that title home to the St. Louis Hawks. The finals in 1958 was personal for Bob because the Celtics beat Bob's St. Louis Hawks in 7 games in the finals the year before. This time, Bob dismantled the Bob Cousy and Bill Russell-led Celtics in 6 games where he averaged 29.3 points, 17 rebounds, and 2.2 assists. In Game 6, Bob Pettit dropped 50 points to put away the former NBA champion, which at the time was the record. Bob went on to have a Hall of Fame career where he earned 11-time All-Star honors, 2-time scoring champ titles, 2 MVPs, an NBA championship, and was the first player to 20,000 points in the NBA. And he is also a part of the NBA 75th anniversary team. The Atlanta Hawks love their LSU players, as the next entry on this list is Pete Maravich. Pete was an exciting basketball player, more known from his moniker Pistol Pete. Pete's time at LSU was outstanding. He averaged 40 plus points per game in multiple seasons at LSU. This obviously caught the eye of the Atlanta Hawks as they selected Pete with the 3rd overall pick. The Hawks had just came off a divisional finals run against the Wilt Chamberlain and Elgin Baylor-led Lakers, but they were swept in 4 games. Pete's fun play style and passing brought entertainment value to the Atlanta Hawks, who were just a few years removed from being in St. Louis. They were struggling to sell tickets, and Atlanta believed bringing Pistol Pete to Georgia could fix that. Little did they know how true that was. Pete was a fun player to watch and brought big ticket sales for Atlanta. However, despite the uptick in sales, the Atlanta Hawks' success dipped since Pete arrived. In his rookie season, he averaged 23.2 points per game, 4.4 assists, and 3.7 rebounds, which landed him on the all-rookie team. The team finished the year with 36 wins and 46 losses, 12 less wins than the year prior. However, it was playoff time and they matched up against the Walt Frazier-led Knicks. The Hawks were no match and were eliminated in the playoff in 5 games. In the loss, Pete averaged 22 points per game, 4.8 assists, and 5.2 rebounds on 37% field goal efficiency. Much was the same in year 2 for Pete and the Hawks. Pete took a step down in his sophomore season where he averaged 19.3 points per game, 6 assists, and 3.9 rebounds per game. The Atlanta Hawks went 36-46 again in the regular season, but they still made the playoffs. The Hawks faced the Celtics in round 1. Pete stepped up big for the Hawks, in which he averaged 27.7 points per game, 4.7 assists, and 5.3 rebounds on 44% of field goal efficiency. The Herculean effort was not enough because they were bounced in the first round by the Celtics in 6 games. In Pete's 3rd year, the Hawks were bounced in the first round again by the Celtics, and in the following season the Hawks didn't even make the playoffs, which resulted in Pete being traded. Despite the playoff success, Pete's jersey has been retired by the Atlanta Hawks. Pistol Pete is a Hall of Famer who was a 5-time All-Star, a scoring champ in 1976-1977 season, 4-time All-NBA player, and is a part of the NBA 75th anniversary team. The next entry on our list stood at 6 feet 8 inches tall and 230 pounds. The human highlight film was a monster in college where he averaged 21.6 points per game, 7.5 rebounds, and 1.8 blocks over 3 seasons at Georgia. The Utah Jazz ironically selected Dominique Wilkins at 3rd overall pick in the 1982 draft, but the French-born athletic freak did not want to play for the Utah Jazz and forced them to trade him before the season started. The Jazz traded Wilkins to a place very close to home, the Atlanta Hawks. Wilkins started off his career in Atlanta, in which he averaged 17.5 points per game, 5.8 rebounds, and 1.6 assists, leading the Hawks to a 43-39 record, which landed them in the playoffs as the 6th seed. There they met a foe they had been battling for 30 plus years, the Boston Celtics. This was the final postseason where the NBA used a 12-team format in the final season for the best-of-3 series in round 1. The Hawks were bounced in the first round again to the Boston Celtics 2-1, where Wilkins averaged 15.7 points per game and 5 rebounds on 40% field goal efficiency. In year 2, Wilkins' production increased to 21.6 points per game, 7.2 rebounds, and 1.2 assists in the regular season. The Hawks were 40-42 going into the playoffs as a 7th seed. The Hawks lost in the first round in 5 games to the Milwaukee Bucks. The human highlight film averaged 19.2 points per game, 8.2 rebounds, and 2.2 assists on 41% field goal efficiency. Wilkins continued to dominate the NBA in the next few seasons. In the 1985-86 season, he averaged an insane 30.3 points per game, 7.9 rebounds, and 2.6 assists. He finished in second place in the MVP voting behind Larry Bird. However, he did win the scoring champ title that year. In the first round of the playoffs, the Hawks battled it out with the Isaiah Thomas and Bill Laimbeer-led Pistons and beat them in 4 games. In the conference semifinals, if you cannot guess by now, was against the one and only Boston Celtics.
Leave me alone!
The MVP of the league, Larry Bird, put the Hawks away in 5 games. For the next 8 seasons, the Wilkins-led Hawks only made 2 conference semifinal appearances. In 1994, the Hawks realized their championship window was closing and decided to trade their franchise cornerstone. Wilkins, of course, is known as one of the greatest Hawks to ever put on the jersey. He finished his Hall of Fame career with 9-time All-Star honors, a scoring champ title in '85, 7-time All-NBA. He's a part of the NBA 75th anniversary team. The next entry on the list is the first player to actually come to the Atlanta Hawks via free agency. After the 95-96 season, Dikembe Mutombo signed a 5-year, $55 million contract with the Atlanta Hawks, leaving the Denver Nuggets. The 7'2" finger wagging blocking machine was a huge addition for the Hawks. In his debut season, he averaged 13.3 points per game, 11.6 rebounds, and an absurd 3.3 blocks per game. Dikembe led the Hawks to a 56-26 record, a 10-win increase from the year prior. This put the Hawks 4th in the conference going into the playoffs. They faced the Grant Hill-led Pistons in the first round and beat them in 5 games. In the conference semifinals, they faced the worst nightmare, last year's NBA champion Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan and the Bulls dismantled the Hawks in 5 games. In his first playoff run with the Hawks, Mutombo averaged 15.4 points per game, 12.3 rebounds, and 2.6 blocks on 62% field goal efficiency. In Mutombo's sophomore year, he led the Hawks to another 50-win season, won 50-32. This put the Hawks 5th in the conference going into the playoffs. In the first round, the Hawks faced the Muggsy Bogues and Dell Curry-led Hornets, who beat the Hawks in 4 games. In this playoff series, Mutombo was not as productive. He only averaged 8 points per game, 12.8 rebounds, and 2.3 blocks on 45.8% field goal efficiency. Third time's a charm is the saying. Yeah, well, not for Mutombo. His shorter 98-99 season due to the lockout resulted in a 31-19 record, which put the Hawks 4th in the conference. Mutombo averaged a double-double for his 3rd time since being a Hawk in the regular season. In the first round of the playoffs, the Hawks beat the Pistons again in 5 games, but quickly got swept in the conference semis by the dominant Trae Young-led Knicks. At this point in history, do not mention the word semifinals to a Hawks fan because they might lash out at you due to PTSD.
My boy giving it his all to keep it together.
In his 3rd playoffs with the Hawks, Mutombo averaged 12.6 points per game, 13.9 rebounds, and 2.6 blocks per game. In the 1999-2000 season, the Hawks regressed tremendously, ending the season with a record of 28-54. The Hawks realized that their window was closing again, so in 2001 at the trade deadline, the Hawks traded Mutombo to the 76ers. Mutombo is one of the many Hall of Famers from the storied Atlanta Hawks history. He finished his career with 8-time All-Star honors, 2-time rebound champion titles, 3-time block champion titles, 3-time All-NBA honors, 6-time All-Defensive honors, and then was a 4-time Defensive Player of the Year. The next entry on this list would be a group of individuals who played together in the 2000s and 2010s. The first guy was a highly recruited basketball player on the Rival scouting report. He was ranked 3rd overall as a player and the #1 small forward in the nation. His name was Josh Smith. Josh Smith attended Oak Hill his senior year where he played with Rajon Rondo. Yes, the Rajon Rondo who eventually played for the Boston Celtics. There at Oak Hill, he averaged 22 points per game, 8 rebounds, and 4 assists. After an outstanding senior year, Josh committed to Indiana University, but instead decided to declare for the 2004 NBA draft. There at the draft, Atlanta Hawks selected Josh Smith with the 17th overall pick. In Josh Smith's rookie year, the Hawks were awful. They ended the season with a 13-69 record. Josh did win the slam dunk contest that year and averaged 9.7 points per game, 6.2 rebounds, and 1.9 blocks. Next year in the summer of 2005, a free agent named Joe Johnson was unhappy with being the 4th option in Phoenix. He wanted a bigger role, which of course he took in Atlanta. However, that didn't come without turmoil. Most were in favor of bringing Joe to the Hawks, but Steve Belkin, who was the team's NBA governor, had to sign off on all trades and free agency signings, did not want to bring Joe to Atlanta. Despite the management side, Atlanta was able to sign Joe to a 5-year, $70 million contract, which involved a sign-in trade. The compensation was Boris Diaw and 2 future first-round picks. For the next 2 seasons, the Hawks would not make the playoffs, would mark a 3-year consecutive drought since Josh Smith got drafted. Joe Johnson was a bright spot for the Hawks in those 2 years, in which he averaged 22.2 points per game, 5.6 assists, and 4.1 rebounds. Josh Smith also took a step up in those 2 years, averaging 13.7 points per game, 7.6 rebounds, and 2.7 blocks. In 2007, a center who was highly decorated in college because he won back-to-back national titles in Florida was sitting there at the 3rd overall pick. Atlanta Hawks scooped up the center in their wings and brought him home. In Al Horford's rookie year, he almost averaged a double-double for the Hawks. He averaged 10.1 points per game, 9.7 rebounds, and 1.5 assists. The Hawks' new trio was enough to push the Hawks into the playoffs with a record 37-45. Do I need to tell you who the Hawks faced in the first round, or should I surprise you? In the first round, Josh met up with his old buddy from his high school, Rajon Rondo. There, the Hawks fought hard against the Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett-led Celtics, but was denied entry into the next round by the future NBA champion Celtics in 7 games. Despite the loss, taking the future champs to 7 games brought some optimism for the Hawks going into the next year. In the 2008-2009 season, the Hawks improved their record to a 47-35 record, landing them 4th in the East. In the first round, they met up against the D-Wade-led Heat and beat them in 7 games. In the conference semifinals, they met up against another NBA legend, LeBron James. LeBron dominated the Hawks, sweeping them in 4 games. In the 3rd year with the trio Joe Johnson, Josh Smith, and Al Horford, the Hawks had their best season yet in the decade. They added somebody special you might know, Jamal Crawford. They received Jamal in a trade at the end of the 2008 season for Speedy Claxton and AC Law. He just came off of a season where he averaged 19.7 points per game, 4.4 assists, and 3.3 rebounds. The Atlanta Hawks ended the 2009-2010 season with a record of 53-29, putting them 3rd in the East. There they fought against the 6th-seeded Milwaukee Bucks and beat them in 7 games. In the conference semis, the Hawks faced Dwight Howard's Magic and lost in 4 games. The Hawks were 5th in the East going into the playoffs next year, where they faced Dwight's Magic again. This time, the Hawks got their revenge, putting away the Magic in 6 games. In the next round stood the waiting MVP Derrick Rose. Derrick Rose put away the Hawks in 6 games and ended the Hawks season. In their last season together, the Hawks were 5th in the East with a record of 40-26. The NBA had a lockout that year, resulting in a shorter season. In the first round, they met up against the lifetime rival, the Boston Celtics. The Celtics sent the Hawks home in 6 games. Joe Johnson was upset with the playoff woes and did not accept the extension the Hawks were offering, so the Hawks were forced to trade him. In the summer of 2012, the Hawks traded the star to Brooklyn, marking the end of the Big Three for the Hawks. Despite not making an Eastern Conference appearance, Hawks fans are appreciative of this era. The Hawks were not even thought of as a playoff contender until these 3 joined the team. Last but definitely not least, the modern era Hawks. In the 2017-2018 season, the Hawks were terrible. They went 24-58, putting them in 15th in the East. Luckily, help was on the way in form of a 6'1" point guard out of Oklahoma. In 1 year at Oklahoma, Trae Young averaged 27.4 points per game, 8.7 assists, and 3.9 rebounds. For this effort, he was a consensus All-American. He received all Big 12 honors. He was the Big 12 Rookie of the Year, and he made the Big 12 All-Freshman team. On draft night is where two faces intertwine. 2 players selected by the other team's future organizations sent shockwaves into the NBA world. Luka was a very talented and decorated player overseas, and he was only 19 years old at the time. However, organizations were afraid of taking a foreign player early on because they didn't know how Luka's game would translate over to the NBA. As we know now, foreign players dominate the NBA currently, like Luka, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Nikola Jokic. But 6 years ago, it wasn't like that. A trade between the Mavericks and the Hawks came into an agreement by the Hawks selecting Luka at 3rd overall, and in return, the Mavericks gave the Hawks the 5th pick in the 2018 and a future first-round pick. So the Hawks did. They drafted Luka at 3rd because they knew Memphis wasn't going to draft Trae at 4th overall. At the 5th pick, the Mavericks selected Trae Young. The trade was made, which would send Luka to the Mavericks and Trae to the Atlanta Hawks. To this date, this is one of the most what-if drafts in history because now looking back in retrospective, most people would select Luka at number 1 overall. In Trae's rookie season with the Hawks ended the season with 29-53 record, which Trae averaged 19.1 points per game, 8.1 assists, and 3.7 rebounds. They obviously missed the playoffs, but the Hawks realized they have something special in Trae Young. In his sophomore season, his production skyrocketed to an insane 29.6 points per game, 9.3 assists, and 4.3 rebounds in the regular season. However, the Hawks still did not make the playoffs. In his 3rd season with the Hawks won 21 more games, putting them in the playoffs with a record of 41-31. The Hawks met the Young Knicks in the playoffs in the first round. Trae Young averaged 29.2 points per game, 9.8 assists, and 2.8 rebounds to put them away in 5 games. In the conference semis, Trae Young faced off against Joel Embiid-led Sixers and beat them in 7 games, in which Trae Young had another another monster series where he averaged 29 points per game, 10.9 assists, and 2.6 rebounds. For the first time since the 2015 playoffs, the Hawks have made the Eastern Conference Finals, marking the second time in Hawks history they made the Eastern Conference Finals. That is where they met the Giannis Antetokounmpo-led Bucks. Tied 1-1 in the series, Trae Young goes down to injury, hurting his ankle. This sidelining him for the most of the series. With Trae down, the Bucks sent the Hawks home in 6 games. In the 4 games Trae did play, he averaged 28 points per game, 6.8 assists, and 3.3 rebounds. Trae Young's Hawks were the 8th seed heading into the playoffs, putting them in the new play-in tournament. Trae Young averaged 31 points per game, 10 assists, and 3 rebounds to beat the Cavaliers and the Hornets in the play-in to make the playoffs. There they faced the Jimmy Butler-led Heat and got bounced in 5 games. In the 2022-23 season, the Hawks made a huge acquisition in Dejounte Murray before the season. Despite this, the Hawks were a play-in team again. There they got their rematch against the Heat. They beat the Heat in the play-in to meet the one and only Celtics in the first round. History repeats itself and the Celtics send the Hawks home in 6 games. The Hawks do have a bright future with the young tandem in Trae Young and Dejounte Murray. I believe Hawks fans are happy to see how the organization continues to build around Trae Young. The organization is young, but we will see how Trae and company can do in the future.